So welcome to the panel session, the last session for today. I'm Sandra Gesing, and we are talking about effective checklists for developers and researchers to gather requirements for science gateways. I know this is a ridiculous long title, but it has the keywords science gateways, requirements, users, researchers, developers. So, and why are we talking about this? I'll make it very fast, since I have people sitting here with decades of experience with science gateways, so I will let them talk afterwards. So if you look at the computational environment nowadays, researchers might be a little bit overwhelmed with them and a little bit sad. Or they might be the ones who know exactly what they want to do and they don't care about what we have advice. But at the end, we want really them to be very happy. And there are a lot of widely used technologies and there are complete frameworks. So we have someone from HUBzero, someone from Galaxy, from the Globus data portal, also from from RESTful APIs, like Apache Vata and the Agave platform, and also from end-user science gateway for co-phylogeny, CIPRES. And the lessons learned from the last decade is really that approaches should be technology agnostic, using a full solution or web technologies or deliver the complete solution. So community engagement is key. And if we talk about requirements, we have to consider different aspects, different groups of aspects, like organizational aspects. Maybe somebody tells you, oh, I have funding for a year and I need to have it finished in a year. Or you have technical aspects. Your team has developers who know all very well Python, but maybe not JavaScript. And of course, the domain-specific aspects, because science gateways are for user communities. And this is the point where I let my panelists introduce themselves and what kind of user communities they have. So Eric? Yeah, you are sitting here. I'm sorry, you're the first one.
Sorry. All right, hello. I'm Eric Huebner from HUBzero. I'm an applications programmer. And HUBzero has a very broad range of audiences and clients. They range from STEM education to cancer research to nanotechnology and everything in between. My background in a previous role, I did a lot of client management, a lot of support, a lot of training, and that also involves branding. Let's say you have a new hub and you're helping them get the Science Gateway set up, branding, developing the community, and help them really cater to their audience.
Thanks, Eric. My name is Dave Clements. I'm with the Galaxy project, which James Taylor talked about this morning in the opening. It's hard to summarize our communities. I'm going to break them into two groups. One is researchers who want to analyze their data. And they don't want to make a career out of it, they just want to analyze their data. So they often want some way to start. Okay, and Galaxy is an excellent way to start. Second group is people who want to support researchers. So if you're a provider, if you are the core at a university, you may want your researchers to be able to run their own analysis. And so that's the second group. So the end user, the researcher, is one of our customers, and the providers are also our second set of customers.
Thanks. I'm Mark Miller. I represent the CIPRES project, and our project primarily serves domain end users. The project arose sort of by demand from the phylogenetics community, and we created it to meet that demand. And I would say 90 to 95% of our users are working phylogenetics researchers, both very heavyweight and some on the lighter weight side, and then some students. It's used for teaching as well.
Hi, I'm Maytal Dahan. I'm the Director of Advanced Computing Interfaces at the Texas Advanced Computing Center. And in our department, we kind of cover the whole spectrum of science gateways, from the front end using kind of a Django-based portal framework to APIs and services such as Tapas that's up there, and it's kind of like API Science as a Service and containerization, Jupyter Hub in the cloud, Jupyter Hub on HPC systems. So we really see a diverse set of clients, whether they're PIs that come to us with a problem and want to reduce their complexity to accomplish their science, who want to plug in directly to the APIs, who have kind of a higher set of kind of technical skills, to those who just want, a pretty simplified interface. Give me forms to manage my data, to run jobs, let our user community just log in an interface that's very familiar to them without having to deal with any of the kind of technical complexities underneath.
Hi, I'm Chard from University of Chicago and Argonne, part of the Globus team. So we provide platform services for a fairly broad range of users, from scientists spanning, I think, probably most scientific domains, through to research administrators that have instruments or storage facilities that they need to make accessible. Our platform services primarily focus on identity and access management and data management.
Hi, I'm Eroma, and I'm representing SciGap. So SciGap is a Science Gateway Platform as a Service, so we deploy and host gateways for clients. So our clients are actually project PIs or domain PIs who would want to provide a gateway for their community. And the underlying software framework is called HUBzero. It's open source software. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. I mean, I have prepared some questions, but I would be much more curious if you have questions for the panelists. I can start, and then I probably can motivate you to ask them. So my first question would be, if you take in, the first interview with a potential customer, do you have something like a checklist? Do you follow a pattern? How do you set that up? And to be fair, I start now from the other side. Roma, sorry, there's a microphone. So do you have a checklist or something you worked with to have the intake interviews?
So there are ways that a potential user or a gateway provider would come to us. So we work with the SGCI Extended Developer Support and the Exceed Extended Consultation Support Services. So we generally meet our gateway PIs or whom that we are going to give gateways to those. So the initial thing, I would like to say that when we get them to us, to our platform, so they're already kind of matched with the services that we provide, because it's never a situation where they came and they're a group that we couldn't support because we've been properly matched. And then the first thing we do is we set up a kickoff meeting, and I wouldn't call it a checklist, but we do have a set of questions that we discuss, and we have a method of discussing it, and we do demos. And if they already have some services that they provide, we actually go and look at we request a demo from them. So it's a set of questions. So yeah, not exactly a checklist or something.
Yeah, so we don't have a formal checklist. Typically when we meet with people for the first time, we try and sort of understand, at least at a high level, we are laymen, so try and understand at least a little bit about their science and what they're trying to accomplish. We try and understand the scientific processes, the research processes that they normally go through. We normally try and identify people beyond the PI that we can actually speak to, because the PIs normally tell you one thing that doesn't always hold true with the people actually doing the work. So if we can try and get in touch with real users, real developers, people that are actually likely to use the thing that we're building, I think that's important to us. And then we're very use case driven. So we try and write up as many use cases as we can in that first meeting. We try and iterate and get them back to the original people to sign off for them. And I think we've all built many systems that haven't been used by people. So it's important to at least try and get that documentation done early.
Yeah, like Kyle said, we don't really have a checklist. I think that we, instead of approaching it of how can we solve your problem, we try to approach it with, tell us about your science, tell us your story, so that we can really maybe understand some of the pain points or some of the ways that our technologies can, take what their needs are to the next level. So it's not really a checklist. I think the biggest struggle is sometimes translating the way we think to the way that stakeholder thinks. You know, we have stakeholders who throw out sometimes the latest buzzword of what they want, you know, without really quite understanding what that is. You know, so I think creating some sort of effective translation mechanism back and forth so they don't have to speak in software engineering or software developer speak or in our kind of technical bubble speak. And to find that middle ground where, you know, like Kyle said, where they're kind of, here are the use cases and here's what we're going to try to move towards.
I would also say, no, we don't have a checklist. We have, I mean, we have probably 10,000 users active in a year, and we grew sort of organically out of the community. So we were part of a large NSF project that was funded to change the way phylogenetics research was done by creating new tools. And basically I'd show up in a meeting and 4 or 5 people would grab me and say, we really need this. We need more compute. We need more whatever. And we listened to that for the first 3 or 4 major things they asked for, and then our usage just took off. And since then, it's really through annual surveys and through submission of requests through the website, which we try to respect and prioritize. But we don't have a formal process for intake.
I'd like to say that Galaxy is also checklist free, so there's a trend. Let's see, we do try and figure out what their goals are. So if they're interested in the platform and they think that it might be a good solution for them, you know, what are their goals? If it's a domain that's not life science, which is something we know very well, we try and figure out if that is a good domain. Are there common data formats? Are there a lot of command line tools that we can chain together to form interesting analyses, stuff like that. We also try to make them aware of what sort of personnel they're going to need to support it. So if they install it, you know, let's say they're going to have use, you know, how much sysadmin time are they going to need to, you know, get it up and running and then to maintain it, to keep it updated. Also try and emphasize that you have to do a rollout and that you have to do that quite well because you only get one chance.
So I would say HUBzero, for us, we're not entirely checklist free. It's more discussion points. So we definitely start out with that high level, you know, what are you trying to do? You know, tell us about your science, tell us a little bit about what resources that you're going to use in that sense to do that research. When we start to talk about resources, that really starts to get into that checklist where, you know, what are you providing to your audience? Are you providing simulation tools? Are you providing some type of code development? Is it discussion forums? Is it publications? And, you know, a bunch of other components that we have available. So that's where the checklist comes in, is really determining what the solution is going to be for them. And in some cases, it could be custom development as well. So, and like you mentioned, there's definitely a kickoff day. There's also that back and forth between us and them. For us to provide an accurate solution, we both have to be on the same page and understand, you know, you say you can make publish tool code, or what we call tools, which is simulation code. What does that mean? Does that mean the same for every research department? Not necessarily.
Okay, thank you. Questions, here we go. Yes.
Does that work? Oh, it does. Okay, perfect. All right. So I have, so my name is Amit Chaurasi at SDSC. So my question is, I'd be interested to hear from all the panelists about what didn't work and how should you not do things? Because I think we hear about how things worked, but we don't really know what didn't work and why it didn't work. So I think that'd be something interesting to hear.
I leave the order of answers to you.
Thank you.
I think what never works is unrealistic expectations and lack of funding. You know, they want all of this, they have this much money. I think that's where we have found the most problems when, either the level of effort or the expectations or the what you're going to get is not in line with or hasn't been effectively communicated. Assumptions are really dangerous. I think that's when it doesn't work. I don't think it's very rarely, at least for us, that a technical barrier or, a resource barrier. It's really kind of, do your expectations really match what we're able to deliver based on, the funding you have or the resources you have to dedicate? I think sometimes sustainability is something that's not thought about if it's not brought on early enough. I think having that conversation early, what are your plans after we're done developing this or we're done helping you keep this going so that it doesn't fall on the ground? That's my experience.
So I spoke about, the client and us being on the same page. I think that's really important, is that client management starts at day one so that you can understand each other and you can move forward, and you have that partnership so you don't have unreasonable expectations, a month down the road, a year down the road. I would also say that planning is probably something that's a necessity that isn't necessarily done at the very beginning. An example that I usually have run into is registration fields. That's something that you normally don't think about. You just want people to register on your site, on your gateway. But what happens in a year when you want to ask demographics about, your user base? If you don't ask questions when they register, you won't necessarily have that information a year later.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Maytal. I don't think very often our failures are caused by a lack of technical ability to actually build things. I think most often when we fail, we've built something that the customers never really wanted in the first place, and maybe we just didn't do our due diligence and didn't speak to enough people to really understand the pain points. If you're building something that's going to replace a process that works perfectly well for them as is with their notebook, it's hard to get them across that line. Another area I think where we see failures is when there's not sufficient buy-in from the people that matter. So the PIs have these interesting ideas and then float off into another sort of interesting idea. If they're not really bought in and invested and see whatever we're building is something that they own and something that they're proud of and want to use and want to make their team use, it typically doesn't work very well. I think the other place where we see a lot of failures, obviously I should have started, Globus doesn't have any failures, but, rattling off a long list of failures. I think the third place where we see many failures is when people don't estimate the requirements post technical development. So I think we've built a lot of great technical systems that perhaps have gone down as failures and haven't been adopted. And primarily, I think the reason is that we haven't worked with the groups we're working with to go the extra mile, the advertising, the documentation, the sort of suite of tools around whatever we're building. So it's sort of like the tip of the iceberg, I guess, is the actual technical piece. And then there's a whole bunch underneath to actually make something successful.
Actually, I think I'm going to add a little bit to what have been already told. So poor communication is something that definitely would not work, because if I look back, all the projects that were successful and really good, they really had a good communications, right? Regularly we meet and we share and we show. And also I believe the way that we do, having a work plan and proper documentation to list down and make sure that both parties review and see whether that's what we want, and also to, whenever needed, to have more detailed requirement specification just to make sure that we have captured the requirement. So it's having better documentation and good communication works. Thank you.
Oh, we're against all of us.
Okay, it is on. So that feeds into my question. If you don't have a checklist ahead of time, and I'm assuming that you don't always have a proposal or a grant that's fully fleshed out, do you at least prepare a detailed statement of work, or do any of you actually do project charters? yes, keyword, I'm a project manager. But the failures you were just leading into, it's the documentation ahead of time where you both agree on what's going to be delivered. Unless you do a really good documentation of that, it leads to the unrealistic expectations, and you get halfway through and you have the rabbit tracking and all of that. Do any of you use project charters or anything, any tool like that?
So we aren't funded to provide individual support for new launches. So the answer to that question is no, there's nothing even close to that. What we do, that's what we do try and do, is create a community of support. So, I mean, there's tens of thousands of users. We try and create a community of support so that when you do try and install it, when you hit a problem, when you're having trouble with authentication, that there's a community of support you can ask and get a fairly quick response to, because lots of people have already done this. So in our case, nothing close to that, trying to provide the community so they can do it, because we're not funded with that model.
Any further?
So we definitely do have processes. You know, we do define a statement of work. We do use Jira. We do have scrums. We sort of call it academic agile. You know, but there are some projects, like bigger projects like Design Safe, where it's, you know, you've really planned out every quarter for the next year. It's really well defined and well understood. But there are other smaller projects that are more experimental, and you know, you have a general idea of the direction you're going in, but you're still sort of fluidly defining it with the stakeholder. And those are the ones that are a little bit harder. But definitely, I think, like you said, good project management practices, even in a small scale, is really important. I think it keeps both the stakeholder informed and then the developers and people managing the project really on the same page as to where things are.
I like the term academic agile. Yeah. I'm definitely gonna use that one. Yeah, I will steal it. Someone should write a paper on that. That would be interesting. Yeah. I tend to agree with Maytal again. I mean, it's very dependent for us on the size of the project. So for some of our bigger projects, we actually have project managers, and I mean, if we could afford them on every project, we would use them on every project. But on some of the smaller ones, I guess things are a little bit more haphazard. Things that are probably the same, we really force people or our team into GitHub everything. So there's GitHub issues for everything from technical to engagement to documentation. And I think that works reasonably well as at least a basis for all projects. And then for sort of some of the bigger ones, obviously we have much more rigid project management, product management even, because there's interoperation, I guess, between what's happening in a project and what's happening in the Globus product. And we need to tie things together and have it's a big team to try and coordinate, and doing that just with issues would be fairly challenging, I think.
So I would go with, we do have a written down documentation, the work plan. That would be the starting point. And as we go on, depending on what we need to, so that not every gateway project would need things to be coded or implemented, but depending on the task that we would be creating the technical Jiras, and also we use Trello just to keep a track of each gateway project. Yeah, so I'm a big believer in documentation, because I really feel that we always need something to go back, revisit, review. So yeah, thank you.
So we've had some really good luck with Kanban boards, if you guys use that. For development requests, we have a work plan that we follow. For onboarding new hubs, it's a little bit different. One of the fun things that we like to do is a kickoff day. So we have a kickoff meeting and kind of a grand opening for the hub. People seem to gravitate towards that, and from a project management perspective, that's definitely a deadline that we have to hit, and then happy day when new users start to get onto their gateway.
Further question? Okay.
Thanks for this panel. I'm Jeff Sale from the San Diego Supercomputer Center. I've heard a lot of really cool, exciting things today. What, if any of you want to share, what kind of things do you see coming down the line that aren't here and now yet that are exciting, that you think are exciting?
So I think for the Galaxy project, it's building a global federation, a global community. So we already have the global community. What we don't have yet is the global infrastructure that when you do something on this Galaxy server in Czechoslovakia, or sorry, on the Czech Republic, you can then use that same login to log into the Australia instance. So actually building this huge network. So I think that's something that's coming. Well, I know that's coming, but trying to build that community so that we can actually say, well, this tool's not available in the Czech Republic, but it is available on the Indian server, things like that. So actually networking everything together in a federated whole.
So, okay.
So I've been stuck in the eScience workshops today, so I don't know exactly what's been said here, but I think, I think it's an interesting time because there's a bunch of technology that's making things a lot more fluid, especially around computation. And I think this is really going to be transformative for the gateways community in terms of obviously networks, high-speed networks are pervasive. You can move stuff around almost as quickly as you can move stuff between memory and processor in a machine. So that starts to blur lines between local and remote. We have, I think as you alluded to there, we have these global federations of identity. The single sign-on problem has been maybe not completely solved, but the web world has, I think, made really good steps that we probably struggled with in the old grid cert days, which obviously weren't particularly usable. And then container technology, I think, is huge. I mean, the ability now for scientists to wrap up stuff and actually have relative faith that it's going to run somewhere else is fairly amazing. So I think we can start thinking about trading off some of these costs, trying to exploit different accelerator architectures, trying to reduce costs of computation by moving it where it's most efficiently executed.
Okay. Further question? We give Mike the time to walk there.
So I think a couple people have alluded to this. I think one of the barriers that I found is the barrier between people that are developing the gateways and the scientists in the science domain, and the terminology and the vocabulary. Can anybody talk to tricks or techniques to get around that? I think that'd be really interesting to hear about.
I think just to keep communicating. I don't know that there's like a magic wand as much as I would like one sometimes. I think having enough people in the room that can help bridge some of that. Sometimes we're, researchers or software engineers, we're kind of in our bubble. We know our bubble really well. We know kind of what we do, and we're, backwards and forwards. So, having additional voices, backgrounds, and opinions in the room to really help shed light on, how are we defining this problem? How are we coming up with a solution to it? I don't know that there's like a magic trick beyond, effective communication, really good documentation, like Eroma said, to where we're all on the same page before we move forward, right? And like really documenting kind of why did we go down this decision for this technology stack, or why did we make this decision to prioritize these requirements over these? Really clarifying that. I mean, there are things that I'm never going to understand about a scientist's actual research. That is their, the things they breathe. But can I understand their pain points better? Can I give them interesting solutions that they may not have thought of to kind of resolve those pain points? Lots of communication and patience. So much patience. Coffee and pastries. Yeah. Something stronger than coffee happens after the communication, but.
In my experience, the most important thing is that the project be led by a domain researcher, that someone who passionately wants to serve his community and understands what their concerns are. And in a sense, the rule is that I like is the developer doesn't get a vote, you know, as far as like user experience, you know, it's like, let the scientists tell you what they need, and don't get enamored with something that's cute and current in technology, but meet their needs, and don't use a shotgun to kill a fly, you know. Anyone? Oh, sorry.
Ladies first.
So one other thing is we've noticed is that although discussions and documentation helps, actually to show and demo helps. Like, this is what we meant, and this is the sort of services we could offer. And at the same time, if somebody's coming with a clean slate, like totally new to the idea of a gateway, just knows that I need one, my personal opinion is it's easy to show and tell what they should be going forward and what they should expect. But if somebody's coming who had a previous gateway or some knowledge of gateways, it's a little bit, it needs a little bit more working. But I feel that if we could demonstrate and show exactly and take it incrementally, it actually helps to get into the same page before too late. Thank you.
I think you said just about exactly what I was going to say. Show and tell really helps.
So I have a further question. So if you have, let's say it's the money is okay. I know that it's never okay, but let's say the planning is good, the money is okay. And now you have so many, let's say, things you could do for different user communities at that level, that money not a topic and a good planning. How would you prioritize that? Dependent on requirements, and how would you choose between features you can extend your gateway with, or extra tools?
Prioritization, let's see. So I want to break this down into two different types of tasks. One is short-term, easy to do. So in our case, that's like we need a new tool, we need a new reference genome, we need something like that. Those are relatively easy to do. Things like that, we'll say, okay, create an issue on GitHub. Enough people go there. If we see it in enough papers, it becomes a priority. But that's easy. I think the priorities that are harder are the ones that are long-term, like what's happening 3 years from now. And you can't get that feedback from your users necessarily. And if you do, you may be too late. And so what you need is strong project leadership that can identify, okay, this is where the domain is moving. And here are the assumptions we currently have, and this is how they're not going to work in the future. Now that's really hard, but you've really got to keep that in mind, I think, pretty much constantly, or else you're going to become irrelevant. So I think to succeed, you've really got to look at the future.
And you never tell that to us at a review.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, to just really listen to the scientist, I think, you know, from a software developer aspect, I think prioritizing things that are sometimes painful, like documentation or testing, or things that will get you out of technical debt if you have, you know, an old code base, those things are sometimes hard to prioritize. And that's where sometimes it is the software developer's job to convince the researchers that that's a good investment of cycles. So I think software developers should get a vote just sometimes.
If not in user experience.
Yeah, no, maybe not in user experience, yes. But
I didn't mean that as
no, I don't know. But yeah, I think that it's an interesting, you know, depending on the phase of the project, the prioritization should kind of start with the science, but as it matures, it should really be a balance.
So we have another question.
Good afternoon. I'm Roger Hathaway, retired NASA employee, and was in the Office of Education. Have been supporting this for a number of times. And I was at lunch today, and I was kind of surprised as I listened around the table. And I asked a question about, or at least I made a statement about being able to sustain your programs in pursuit of not grants, but contracts. And I reckon the question that I have, or the statement I'm going to make, is centered around as collaborative partners, or as a collaborative partner at your university, to what extent are you working with your contracts side of your university in a way that will allow you to move more forward in pursuit of contracts? Because to be honest with you, that's where the future funding really is. And NSF, that's what I know they've encouraged in the past, and I encourage you to look to that in the future, because most federal agencies are moving toward contracts, and they're looking for partners like this. So I truly believe it's worth the conversation. I haven't been here, maybe you've had the conversation, but I'd like to encourage it. I'll hear more about it. Thank you.
So any?
I mean, I certainly agree with you. I think from my seat, it's really important to diversify our funding stream as much as possible and not just rely on grants. So I certainly agree with you, and our portfolio has diversified to include contracts as well. So I think it's important to, in order for us to sustain ourselves, to really continue to look outside the box with regards to how we're going to be doing that.
I think our approach for diversifying funding streams is a bit different. We're exploring more like individual user paying fee for service for access, and that's the model we're experimenting. And there's an organization called Phoenix Bioinformatics that has done this with the Arabidopsis information resource, and they have now a business development wing, and for a cut of whatever you take in, they'll provide the service. So that's the direction that we're going in, rather than contracts.
So we've tried a subscription model where for if you need additional HPC resources or additional storage space, that there would be a monthly fee for that. That was okay. I know some of our hubs also have what I guess would be considered a sub-gateway, like a gateway within a gateway. So they have their own funding projects. Sometimes it's NSF funded, but that's a sustainable model for some of our gateways, is to bring in their own projects and keep their funding going. One of our efforts we are calling One Science Place, and we were looking at, for us as building infrastructure for gateways, what's the reproducibility that how can we create enough reproducibility where we can lower our costs so we can bring more people into One Science Place and they can all do science together and collaborate. So rather than doing individual gateways, it's all one together, one place to do science. With that, there comes a lot of lower costs, and we are continuing that effort. Sorry, yeah.
I'm going to snag this while it's here. So James this morning talked about an STTR that will look at commercial deployments of Galaxy. So that's one way we're doing that. I'd like to talk about something else, which is international funding. So our project is actually funded by grants, still grant funding, but it's in Europe, it's in Australia, it's in South Africa. If our grants go away, the project will live on. I won't have a job, but the project will live on, which means the community gets to rely on the platform even if we go away, because we can no longer go away. We are truly a global community. So I think there's value in that. And if you can pull that off, it works pretty well.
Yeah, so from a Globus perspective, we've obviously tried a lot of different ways to sustain the service. So we tried things like per user subscriptions. We actually got an NSF award to experiment with ways to charge people to sustain the service. I would say I think we managed to get 3 or 4 subscribers as users, one of whom was Ian. So, and that was with a sort of $7 a month plan. So I think that was scrapped. Our current model for I'll separate the sort of Globus service that's user facing from the platform, which is more gateways focused. So from the user perspective, we tried charging users, we tried charging scientific groups, And we've settled on a model where we are basically a subscription to research computing centers and universities, national cyber infrastructure providers, et cetera. And that's actually working fairly well. I think we're about 50 or 60% now sustainable based on these subscriptions that universities are basically paying us yearly. For that, they get enhanced support, they get some slightly better capabilities, but the sort of the core Globus capabilities are still completely free for everyone in the freemium model. From the platform perspective, where we're trying to provide capabilities that make it easier for people to build upon Globus services and not reinvent the wheel, it's less clear there how we should, and we're throwing around ideas, but we don't have a very clear plan yet on how we would make that side sustainable. We have probably half a dozen to a dozen groups that are paying us for subscriptions for particular platform capabilities, but I think that's still a work in progress. And I think as a community, it's something we should all think about, because ultimately sort of lower cost subscriptions for reliable services to build upon are going to save money in the long run when you think about the development and maintenance costs.
Further question? Oh, sorry.
I'm just adding to that. Actually, I agree with Kyle, because it's something maybe we should actually, in a conference like this, have a detailed discussion how we want to explore other methods of sustaining. And even for us now, it's mainly NSF funded, and the other aspect is that we get written into our clients' grants. But we certainly are moving into looking at other methods of funding and maybe providing services for a charge, something like that.
So it's Brian Corey from CIPRES University in Vancouver, Canada, but I'm going to put an EU spin on this because I don't know exactly how the funding works in the US, but I'm part of an EU Horizon 2020 project, and they actually have built into their program plans commercialization, and you typically have industry partners. So I was wondering if people could comment. I don't know if there's anybody from the EU here that has more experience, because this is only the first 9 months in this project. So I don't know how well it works, but that seems to be driven to that sustainability question, that you have partners that take what you do and find clients and deliver services to those clients. So that's an interesting model. I don't know how well it works, but it's just more a comment than a question, I guess.
Yeah, I can say a little bit about an EU program, even living in the US. I know collaborators of mine in the UK who have done this model also a little bit longer now with Horizon. It has advantages and disadvantages. Industry is not always buying fully in. For them, it's still more a playground, like, let's have a look whether the academics really do what they tell us. So we don't know how that works out. So I think it's really a case-to-case basis. Okay, any further question?
Yeah, I mean, just to add a little bit to that, I mean, NSF has their I-Core program for commercialization, but also in reality, a lot of the stuff we work on, the researchers, that's not the direction they want to go in, or that's not necessarily the direction of where we want to go in. So I think there's a lot more to commercialization, and that's not always the right strategy, but it is definitely one to keep in mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this doesn't actually require any kind of a response other than raising a hand, and it can be discussion for wine, which I think is about to start. Is that correct?
I was told that I can overgo the time a little bit.
Oh. So nobody has to actually answer in words, but in the spirit of Macy's versus Gimbel's, how many of you have had a discussion with somebody and said, we don't do what you want to do, but that other person over there does. You should go talk to them. And it could be one of the people sitting at the table right now. All. Okay. Little hesitancy, but okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you. So we talked at the end a lot about sustainability. So, the Science Gateway Community Institute is organizing this, and I just mentioned them for a moment that we have bi-yearly, not bi-yearly, twice a year, a focus week focusing on helping with sustainability. So if you want to hear more about that, Mike is there. And everyone else, I think, of the SGCI staff team can also answer questions about that. And I would like to thank our panelists. This was a great discussion. Thank you for taking the time and being here and answering all these questions.